When the Army built an air station near Fallon, Nevada in 1943 and withdrew federal lands around Dixie Valley and 3 other bombing ranges, the few scattered residents living within the bombing ranges approved of it.
The reason that we moved in 1944 was that the Navy asked us to leave, and I don't believe there was a buyout at that time because we still owned our property, still maintained that ranch, but they didn't want the people to be in the valley.
In the patriotic fervor of World War II, it seemed as though this was a temporary situation and that the land would revert to the public domain after the war. Instead, the Navy took over and turned the rudimentary Army base into one of the top pilot training facilities in the nation. The Navy liked the Dixie Valley area because of the airspace it provided. But long before the Army or Navy entered the picture, those that chose to live there knew that Dixie Valley was an attractive place to live. Dixie Valley is long and narrow, measuring over 100 miles from north to south, located on Highway 50 about 70 miles east of Fallon. In its earlier history, Native American peoples used the valley as a stopping place on their seasonal rounds. An abundance of artesian wells provided water for humans, as well as bobcats, coyotes, deer, and chukar. From 1861 to 1868, numerous companies mined potash, borax, and salt, sending these goods to Virginia City and mining towns in the area. Some came to Dixie Valley in search of silver, copper, and gold, as mining in the area hit a peak in the early 1900s. The town sites of Fairview, Wonder, Hercules, Victor, Bernice, and Dixie were all established by 1907. These towns, however fleeting, would later provide the population and transportation base for the Dixie Valley settlement. Beginning in 1904, the United States Reclamation Service was busy enticing settlers to its newly completed reclamation project near Fallon. With the advent of the Homestead Act in 1862, the Desert Land Entry Act of 1877, and the Pittman Act of 1919, the government hoped to increase the number of settlers in the sparsely populated West. Under these acts, Dixie Valley residents could file for a piece of land and prove up on it by developing their property with a well and irrigation system sufficient to farm at least 5 acres. The Desert Land Entry Act required 360 acres of public land to be patented in order to establish a farm. One of the earliest farmers in Dixie Valley was Nicholas Sullivan, who obtained a patent on his land in 1914. He sold it to John Macedon 2 years later. Macedon had moved here from the east with 2 of his cousins, and despite his best efforts, his attempt at agriculture in the desert failed, mainly due to the voracious appetites of the valley's wild rabbit population. In 1926, he sold his holdings to Leon Ellis. The Ellis family kept the property in the family for many years, making ends meet by diversifying their cash crops.
Well, we came out in a hay wagon with 5 horses, I believe, and a team. Took them a couple days from Fallon to get into Dixie, and that would be back in 1920, I think. Well, we raised cows mostly, and alfalfa seed and honey. And then he trapped in the wintertime. He was a trapper.
We helped with everything we did, and I would have to go with him to the bee house. He never got stung, but I always got stung with the bees. And when we got in there, he had a wood stove, and he had to heat up the scraping knife that was hot to take the wax off of the frames. We had an extractor, and we'd put the frames in there, and you turn, and all the honey would fly out and go into 5-gallon cans and the thing. And then he would sell them to whoever wanted them, the 5-gallon cans.
This is the Ellis homestead. Behind me is one of 2 of the adobes that originally was here. The house adobe has since burnt down. This is the apiary, an example of the secondary income strategy that was necessary in the Dixie Valley area. This is also an example of the make-do strategy of building buildings with what resources were in the area. This building is built from mud and alternating layers of plants that were both present here at the time. Located inside the adobe is an apiary feature, the location where they distilled the honey.
Another longtime family in the Dixie Valley area were the Starks. Lily and Clyde Stark moved to the valley in 1915 and, like their neighbors, the Ellises, augmented their incomes through diversification.
My grandparents actually homesteaded in Dixie Valley, and they were living in San Francisco. At the time, they had come west from Kansas, and my grandfather was working on a river boat on the Sacramento River. He saw an ad in a newspaper that said land was available in Dixie Valley, Nevada, and he was very excited about that. And so my grandfather returned to San Francisco, and a short time later, he and my grandmother and their two sons, who were born at that time, one of which was my father, traveled back to Nevada. They went out to see the property so my grandmother could see it. Returned to Fallon, they found the land office, and they filed on the property. Then my grandmother went in spring of 1921. She had gotten a job in Fallon teaching at Lone Tree School. And I have to say that my grandmother was very proud of the fact that she, and I think this is amazing, she received $90 a month for 8 months during the school year for teaching. So this was a wonderful benefit to the family, because one of her great concerns was, where are we going to have income to do this whole project of moving to Nevada?
Over the years, the remoteness of the valley drew a diverse group of individuals to the little community. Socialist reformers, confirmed bachelors, reclusive hermits, cowboys, and large families. Many of these residents were self-sufficient, growing their own vegetables and fruit trees, raising chickens and milk cows, and fishing in the streams. And there was water in this desert valley. Artesian wells were abundant, a ready resource to be tapped by the farmers. The isolation of Dixie Valley was something the residents faced every day.
I don't think I went to town until I was 6 years old, when I came in here to get my first pair of shoes, really. And we had people were congenial around there. They were friendly and friends.
It was very remote, but we probably were more lucky than most of the families in Dixie Valley, because my grandfather drove the mail route, and he came every Tuesday and every Saturday out to the valley, and he brought the mail and he brought groceries. As my mother says, if she wanted to visit in Fallon, she went with my grandfather back to town between mail days. So we didn't feel that we were so remote because we had access to town.
Because a daily trip to the store was unheard of, children in Dixie Valley used their imaginations for the games.
My sister and I had a wonderful time together. We rode our horses. We made up games that had to do with our life. My mother tells the story of walking outside and seeing me upside down on a single tree being dipped into a barrel as a very good pig being scalded, and my sister was pulling the rope and the pulley and dipping me up and down.
Making my own toys. I made a slingshot and a bow and arrow, and 100 arrowheads galore out there.
My sister and I graduated together in the 8th grade, and we had a teacher, Pearl Allen was our teacher, and she had bought embroidered dimity material, and so my sister and I made our 8th grade graduation dresses in school, and she had gotten the material for us, and so we had our graduation.
Of course, all days were not play days for the children in Dixie Valley. Not only did the school play an educational role in the community, it was also a gathering place for residents in the entire valley.
We also mentioned about the school being a central gathering point, and they often had potluck suppers and dances. And you know, I can remember going in that school and that was not a very big room. And so it kind of amazes me that they had a piano in there, and one of the gentlemen played a fiddle, and they had wonderful dances.
Sometimes we'd go home just in time to milk the cows, you know. And so whenever we had things like that, everybody brought food, you know, and we had a dinner, and they have a big bonfire outside and have the coffee pot on.
While farmers and their families busied themselves with everyday life, Mother Nature would sometimes remind them that she was in control. In the early morning hours of December 16, 1954, a strong earthquake rattled Dixie Valley. Registering 6.5 on the Richter scale, the damage to the landscape was great.
About crack of dawn, I suppose, because it was just getting light and everybody was in bed. When a big bang, 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 Mom says, earthquake. And my brother and I got out, and Mom was coming out. And boy, everything was, it sounded like it came from one way, and then it was, oh, I don't know, half a minute or some darn thing, it was quiet. And then all of a sudden, boy, it just all heck broke. And there already had stuff on the floor in there, all the tables, stuff on it was on the floor. And when I got outside, we had a rock wall. I went by it, and Hugh was by there waiting, and Mom come out. And then all of a sudden, it just boomity, boomity, boom. And I got down to my knees. Mom was out on her knees. And I was looking under my little Chevy, and it was jumping up and ground like this, so I see under the tires of it. About that time, Dad came out of there, and he was waltzing on a heater in there, a whole circle around there, and then he flopped him on there. Got a scrape out of it for hitting that cement floor. But the booming, the noise of it, it was just like the earth was going to open and drop you. And it was just standing on a drum and beat on it. It was the darndest noise I ever heard in my life.
We went to Dixie to see my folks, and here's this huge wall. The road from the highway would come into the valley, you know, along the foothills, and then, but all the way along was this huge wall. The ground and the trees are up there, and down here's the road, you know, and here's this big tree with all the roots sticking out. There weren't any tremors while we were visiting there, but we'd always hear this big explosion, boom, every so often, boom, just, you know, day and night, but not constantly, but it was just down, sounded down deep.
Whatever Dixie Valley residents thought of their life in the valley, their routines were to be drastically changed when the Navy announced in the mid-1980s that it was going to purchase the valley as an airspace for its supersonic operations. The people still living in the valley were given 3 months to move from their premises and were paid the going rate for their land. Some were relieved to sell, and others were not ready to leave. Today, some of the areas of Dixie Valley are still accessible. The Navy has installed 6 points of interest signs at some of the old ranches. Dixie Valley Cemetery still exists. Yet, as supersonic jets speed over the valley's landscape, only a fraction of the stories the homesteaders, miners, and families of the valley are told in what they have left behind.